The change that I've observed in men in recent years, in my circle of mates, is that they're more open to the idea of the existence of mental health issues, right? So the difference is 10 years ago, in my social circle, there would have been very little truck with anyone even mentioning that. Someone would have said, I'm in therapy. They go, oh, do me a favour, you idiot. Stop being such a whinger.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Soberful podcast. I am joined today by a return guest, Sam Delaney. Hi, Sam.
Hi, how's it going, Veronica?
Good. So, Sam is a journalist and writer and broadcaster, and we're here to talk about his new book because as soon as I heard about it, I wanted to get him back on the show. I'm going to say throughout this interview, Sam is British, as you can tell, and I'm going to have to do some translating because there's going to be some words and phrases that I know that we're going to use that won't always translate in America. So Sam's new book is called Sort Your Head Out, Mental Health Without All the Bollocks. So I'll interpret that for the Americans. Sort your head out is quite a British phrase, isn't it? Sort your head out. Yeah. It's like get it together.
Get your head straight. Would you say that in America? Yeah.
Get your head straight. Yeah. Mental health without all the rubbish.
Garbage.
Bollocks is just, I'm going to say, bollocks is a very... I mean, we've certainly only been into this 1 minute. We've had a lot of, that's just a very British phrase, right? We use it to describe most things.
Yeah, that's not used at all in the States, right? I mean, it's literally just a colloquial term for testicles. And yet we use it to basically mean anything that doesn't quite make sense or is at all pretentious or rubbish or you just don't agree with.
Yeah.
It's kind of a broad term, but essentially it just means testicles.
Yeah. So like we would say, what an absolute load of bollocks. Every British person pretty much says that, apart from maybe my mother. But so that's what it means. So I love Sam and his work because I love the contrast to, the work that you do now and the lifestyle that you led and all of that kind of stuff. Tell me why you wrote the book.
Well, I suppose it's a cliche, but I wrote the book that I would have needed probably, 10, 12 years ago when I first started struggling, vividly with mental health issues, which I felt unable to deal with, felt unable to open up about, was deeply ashamed of because I didn't feel like I really had the right to feel miserable about anything. Didn't understand any of it. And as a result, me being ashamed and feeling very alone and keeping it to myself, I ultimately ended up self-medicating using alcohol for, something which I'd always done. But it really, when mental health issues came calling in a big way, depression and anxiety in my mid to late 30s, I kind of, having always been someone who'd used alcohol in my life, I guess for what I perceived as fun, and for switching off, I started to depend on it in a much more kind of sinister way. And I think that if what I needed was someone who I could relate to, someone who was, I guess, from a similar background to me, maybe spoke in a similar way to me. Back then, there was still a lot more stigma and secrecy around mental health generally, culturally and socially. But even those who did talk about it, it felt a little bit prissy, hippie-ish, not the sort of stuff that I felt I could relate to. Back then, the old me would have definitely said, it sounds like a load of old bollocks, to use that particular idiom. And I no longer think any of that stuff's bollocks. But what I do think is that all the advice and wisdom and insight and experience surrounding issues to do with mental health, which is so often linked to misuse of alcohol, needs to be all of those stories and all of that stuff needs to be expressed in as many different ways as possible. So there's nothing unique about what I'm saying, but maybe the way in which I'm saying it is a bit different to what people are used to reading or hearing, because I say it in my own vernacular, and I'm trying to speak in particular to blokes like me who might have grown up Jack the Lads, as we call them here in this country. That's another thing that probably needs interpreting.
Okay, Jack the Lad, that is a very I was trying to think of this actually when I was lying in bed this morning, like what would be the American equivalent? It's kind of like sort of like a fraternity, a frat
bro.
boy, but who hasn't gone to college. There's, you know, like so without the college education, maybe. I'm reading the description here. Sam Delaney was Jack the Lad. He was confident, loud, and funny, an absolute legend, to be honest, or at least that's what he pretended to be. Now, what Jack the Lads, what fraternity boys don't do ever is feelings, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing internal. It's all external.
Yeah.
But, death, right?
A quick way to describe it is probably like I made my living in the first sort of few years of my career in the like late 90s and early noughties in men's magazines. And the men's magazine that I was editor at large of in the UK for a few years was Maxim. And so that should be something that most Americans can relate to, because Maxim was a huge in its time in the United States. And so that kind of reflected what Jack the Lad culture was. You know, the key thing about it was not taking anything seriously, least of all yourself, right? So, and I grew up in that culture, it was anathema. And I think it was generational. You know, it's a bit to do with being male. Yeah. It's a bit to do, I guess, with class.
Yeah.
But mostly, I think, and you'll relate to this, Veronica, it's to do with our generation. I think our generation grew up and the whole idea was don't take anything seriously. Nothing. Everything's ripe for joking. Everything's ripe for irreverence. And the worst crime of all is to look as if you're taking yourself at all seriously, that you think you're at all like that you have a hint of self-importance or self-reflection. That's all pretentious nonsense, right? That is really what the culture I grew up in. And I think it's particularly pronounced amongst blokes, men of a certain class or cultural background. Yeah. I grew up around football and the pub and beer and all of that sort of stuff. But I think it was all of us. I think, and I also think, you know, with Generation X grew up with a lot of that kind of work hard, play hard mentality. There wasn't much in the way of balance. You didn't really learn how to sort of treat yourself with much love or kindness. You know, you're all about just kind of smashing work, smashing partying, smashing drink, all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And you know, and that's why I felt extremely isolated when things got on top of me. I never thought they would. And I was like, why the hell do I feel like this? I felt exhausted, overwhelmed, constantly terrified, riddled with anxiety and paranoia. And as a result, pretty depressed. And I couldn't tell anyone because I thought that terrible phrase, first world problems, that I think is an awful phrase that has created so many problems for a lot of us, because it kind of implies, well, I'm sorry, but at least unless you've had some...
What have you got to moan about?
What have you got? And that's what I thought about myself. I trash talk to myself every day in my head. Thought, what the hell have I got to... I've got a great career. I've got a wonderful family. I've got a brilliant wife. You know, I've got loads of love. And I was actually disgusted by my own feelings. You know, and so in answer to your question, all of those feelings really, I can still vividly remember how bad they made me feel. I know they played a huge part in driving me deeper and deeper into drink because I was constantly running away from those feelings. And if only a book like this had existed back then, I would have felt a bit more seen, as they say.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting because, I mean, I recognize it so much. And I was, you know, we are Generation X, me and you. Just that whole era defined us, the music, everything. I was thinking about, you came into my mind the other day, actually. I was on a plane and one of the things, there was no films I wanted to watch. And there was a documentary on Oasis's 2 nights at Nebworth. And it was on American Airlines, bizarrely. Yeah. And I watched it because it was sort of a documentary about the time, as well as like, Oasis are I don't think they really cracked America, but they're a massive British band back in the 90s. And it was just really interesting, you know, because it was all Jack the Lads. It was all like giving it large. It was all about it was all about the party, wasn't it? The 90s was all about going out, right? If you weren't going out, what a loser.
It was a form of nihilism. I think it was like nihilism, really, that whole kind of... I think it was like, don't take anything seriously. You can't control the world. Morality's it's kind of like, it's all a distraction. You might as well, you're here for a short amount of time. Don't reflect or pause for thought and anything. Just go out and have a great time. That's all you can really do.
Yeah.
I think that's what we all thought, and we were wrong.
Yeah. And we look back, and at the time, so I read the beginning of your book, and it's a really great intro, is this whole story you have about going to the darts. And they must do darts in America. Like, you know, I don't know what they would call it. The darts.
They have darts in the bar, don't they?
I think so. But it's quite a sport in England. Anyway. Yeah,
it's huge, yeah.
At the time, I would have told you I was having the best night. But really, I really wasn't, because I was waking up with anxiety and all the things you described. How long did that go on for? How many years did you try and mask it and hide it, do you think?
Well, it's interesting that, isn't it? Because on the one hand, I would say, well, it was probably the last 2 years before I got sober where I was really, really struggling with all of this stuff. But then in sobriety, 8 years down the line, I sort of reflected on my entire life whilst writing this book, because really this is kind of part memoir. It's like a mental health memoir, really. And I thought, well, actually, if I can go back to my teens, certainly my 20s, and remember constantly suffering from really bad anxiety that I was hiding, really bad fears. It didn't quite, I was able to ride it a little bit better, perhaps. So I suppose always anxiety was a presence in my life, going right back to childhood. Alcohol exacerbated it a lot throughout early adulthood, but it was only in those last couple of years where it got so bad. And the depression and anxiety, it's hard for me to even verbalize how bad it was. Maybe the worst thing was that I always had associated that with people, becoming recluses. Whereas what I was doing was I was working so hard to pretend to be okay that in itself was absolutely exhausting. It was killing me, because I had my work involved me being on radio, being on TV. Most days I was doing something that was very public facing. I was also, out and about, writing, hustling for work. And my personality, my career and my sort of was built so much around my personality. And that personality was one that was outgoing and confident and funny. And when I'm on form, that stuff comes quite easily to me. When I'm off form, it is like a Herculean effort just to have a single fleeting conversation with someone whilst maintaining this persona. And I was I just felt like crying for about 2 years. And during those 2 years, there was a huge amount of effort made to start and, to stop drinking. And, just a number of failed attempts went on and on and on.
So what brought it to a head, and what helped you? So first of all, what brought it to a head? Like, what kind of was the jumping off point?
And I'm sure we talked about this last time, but I guess it's that gift of desperation. But, I'd had depression, anxiety. I'd had a couple of really bad bouts of it. And like that, both of which had lasted like sort of 2 to 3 months. I'd got over them, or I'd managed to get through. They'd faded away a bit, and then I thought I was better, and then it all came back a year later. And then after that, I was so scared of it coming back again, because it was so horrible, that I started to increase my drinking. And then the depression and anxiety actually didn't come back in the same form, but it was a whole different thing, because I could just at that stage feel my whole life just spiraling. I lost all respect for myself, really. I wasn't kind of behaving in a way that really lived up to the sort of standards I had for myself and my personal values. I was, I let myself go physically. I was, angry a lot of the time. I was selfish. I was staying out. I was the sort of person who, like, on my way home, I was overworking hugely. I was on my way home from work. I would often stop in the pub on my own and have quite a few drinks before going home, because in my head I thought that's what I needed to do in order to be able to cope with everything that was going on, all the work and the family commitments. And then I was often doing things like after my wife and kids had gone to bed, I would say I'd stay up to do a bit of work. But in fact, I'd stay up half the night drinking, and then it would all start again the next morning. And slowly it was like, oh my God. As I write in the opening chapter of the book, I was really thinking, how am I getting away with this night after night? When's my rock bottom coming? When is someone or something going to intervene and stop this happening? And over time, you realize that's just not going to happen, And so there's a moment I write about in the book where just in the dead of night, I'm just like, I tried everything. I tried so many different ways to sort of cut down and control my drinking. And then in the end, I Googled the Priory, which is the most famous rehab sort of centre in the UK. And it's only famous.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the best. It's famous because it was always in the papers because it's where celebrities tended to go. And so therefore it was the only one I'd heard of.
It's the equivalent. It's the equivalent to the Betty Ford in America. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's the only one I'd heard of. I knew nothing about all of that stuff, and I didn't think it was for me in the least, but I was desperate. I was awake. My wife was asleep next to me. My kids were asleep in the next room. They were sleeping peacefully. I was frantic, sweating, tearful, lying in bed, completely unable to sleep. And I went online and I registered for a free assessment. And then the next day I probably thought, that was just a moment of madness like you have in the night sometimes. That's not for me. I'm not that guy. I'm not going to end up in rehab. But actually the woman, and I thought it was just some computerized automated thing, but an actual human being emailed me and said, we see you've registered for this free assessment. Do you still want to do it? What time do you want to come in? And I was like, oh my God, I wasn't expecting that. I was so close to not going. It was a real sliding doors moment. And I think on reflection, the only reason I did go was out of kind of journalistic curiosity. I'm a journalist and I'm nosy about stuff. And I genuinely think that part of me just wanted to see what it was like up there. Right. And so on a day when I had the appointment, I probably...
See if there's any celebrities when you go...
Yeah. And,
yeah,
exactly. I mean, bloody hell, back in the old days, I mean, I used to edit the biggest celebrity gossip magazine in the UK. It would have been actually... probably quite lucrative for me to have gone up there about 10, 12 years ago. But I went up there almost like on a whim, because the way I was in those days, I'd make appointments or agree to do things all the time and then think nothing about just cancelling or doing a no-show. I'd just fallen into those kind of bad habits had just become second nature to me. I didn't think twice about it. I probably thought, but that probably won't turn up. Like I used to say to my wife when she started to get very upset and notice how much I was drinking, I would tell her all the time, don't worry, I'm going to stop, or don't worry, I'm going to cut down. And even as I said it, I was just thinking in my mind, there's no way I'm going to stop. What I'm going to do is obviously be a lot more careful about hiding it from you. Those were the sort of conversations I had in my head. Like, really, my inner voice was just like this monster. Do you know what I mean? And I justified everything to myself, thinking other people don't understand. And that is why I actually think that cliche of a devil and an angel on your shoulder that you see in cartoons, I really actually, writing this book made me reflect a lot on that I do think alcohol had an actual voice that spoke to me and twisted my mind for those years, because I was like always sort of chuckling to myself, like an evil chuckle inside, thinking, these idiots, these squares, they don't understand how I operate and they don't understand how life is. They're just too boring and unimaginative to understand. What a joke that is. The most unimaginative thing you can do is just respond to all of life's problems by chucking drink down your throat,
So I know when you were on the show before, you talked about getting sober. So, I mean, it goes hand in hand. Getting sober is going to improve your mental health. I mean, that was my story as well. I had my panic attacks and anxiety came from drug use, and then I used alcohol to manage the panic attacks and anxiety.
Yeah, similar.
I mean, you right? I mean, we're not even remotely original. Every client I've worked with, more or less, has used alcohol to deal with anxiety of some kind. I want to tell you, Sam, when I worked in rehab back in the early aughts, I would have blokes like you in rehab, and it always kind of got me. And they would come in and be like not really meant to be here, just pleasing the wife, like all of that. And I'd be like, oh, I am going to crack you. and which inevitably we did. And all of these, and then the vulnerability. And it always got me because I knew that for men of your generation and older, it was a big thing. It was a big, big thing to open up and show what was really inside. Much more than it felt like. I always felt like that with every client, but I felt it so much more with men of a certain age. And I so many times I felt like this human being, this is the first time in their entire life they have ever shown someone how they really feel and what's going on. And it almost felt like quite sacred to me, but it always blew me away. Like I knew it was not a small thing for that person.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not a religious person. In fact, I was raised a pretty devout atheist, right? And yet I feel like when I first sat down with my therapist at the Priory, who remains my therapist, and I see her every week still all these years later, I felt like it was something from a religious story, because I kind of almost fell at her feet. And once it started coming out and she showed me the sort of understanding and kindness that I'd sort of hadn't expected from anyone, because I'd started to be very angry, bitter and resentful of anyone around me. It was like some sort of epiphany moment, and I did just it started spilling out of me. Actually, it was difficult to build up to it, but once I was in a room with her and I realised where she was coming from, the floodgates were open. Funnily enough, I talk about being raised as an atheist. I mean, obviously, my viewpoints on spirituality have changed a huge amount during sobriety, I guess, like I do. I think that's fairly common. But I remember watching the film W, which is about George W. Bush. Again, George W. Bush is not someone who I would have felt aligned with politically, but I thought it was an interesting film. And he had an alcohol problem, didn't he, when he was younger? And there's a scene in it where
alcohol and cocaine, I think.
Yeah. So that was same with me. I had a cocaine problem that ran in parallel to my alcohol problem, and there's a scene in it where he goes to see his pastor, I think, and he just sort of throws himself at his mercy. And the pastor says, I'm going to make everything all right. And there was something about this scene, right? I think I was bang at it, as they say at the time. I think I was really struggling with my drink and drugs problem. And I just watched this scene in a film about a politician who I'd never really had much affection for at all, in a religious context, which is another thing that I didn't have much sort of affection for either. And yet something about it, I thought, the idea of just going into a room and sort of throwing yourself at someone else's mercy and them saying, I'm going to make it all right. That was so appealing to me. Now, that's not what happened. I think I don't want to give people the impression that you can go into therapy, throw yourself at someone's mercy and they'll fix it all. You got to do the hard yards yourself, obviously. And it's a long, complex road. But there was something about finding a person who was non-judgmental and could just sort of listen with empathy that made a huge difference to me. And you're right, just made me start to speak about my feelings in a way that I had never done with anyone before. But most of all, Veronica, it just made me get back in touch with my own feelings in a way that I'd never been. It wasn't like there was a voice in my head where I understood my own feelings, where they came from or what I was struggling with, but I hadn't told anyone else. That's not what it was. I just didn't understand. I hadn't ever reflected enough on my own behaviour or feelings to understand they even really existed.
It's really something, isn't it? How did you feel about your mates who were still sort of on it and partying, and you were beginning to see you needed to not drink and that your mental health would improve? What was that kind of process like?
I was just scared of losing my mates because I didn't want to. That was one of the big things that put me off. My biggest fear was being boring. That was my number one fear in life, probably, which you think is very similar to other people of my generation. Just like, Oh my God! Imagine that. It's you sort of almost at that age associated stopping drinking with stopping living, giving up. And I thought, oh God,
Yes,
this is one of the things. This is my mates are gonna not want to hang around me anymore. I didn't think any of my good mates would literally just say, "Oh, you're sacked. You're not our mate anymore." But I thought, oh, it'll just happen. We'll drift because they won't find me. They might find me difficult to be around. They might feel that I'm judging them, or they might just find me plain boring. None of that happened. My mates, all of whom, or almost all of whom, to begin with, continued to drink and take drugs. They reacted with indifference, to be honest, which is exactly what I needed. They were just indifferent. They were just like, oh, okay, all right. That's it. And I didn't want to discuss it with them because I didn't feel ready. They were just like, all right, suit yourself. Don't really care. You're not going to stop us from drinking, are you?
No. Will you drive then?
Yeah, exactly. It was that sort of thing.
You're going to drive.
So that really worked well for me in the early years. Now, since then, over the years, all of my close mates at some point or another have discussed it with me in a bit more depth, or very often opened up to me about their own concerns about drinking and drugs. And I've tried to be there for them. But on the whole, the indifference was just what I needed as a bloke, because I was ready to talk to my therapist. I was ready to talk to my wife, but I was not ready to sit down with the lads and say, right, come on. I've really been getting in touch with my feelings recently, and I think it's high time you all did the same. I wasn't ready for that. The mates, there was I can think of maybe 2, maximum 3 people who reacted in a way that wasn't ideal, and I found them very easy to just, kind of organically remove from my life. But I've been very lucky with my other mates, the ones who I've always gone to football, soccer with, which is where my social life really revolved around, and my old mates even from school, all of whom I've continued to be really close with and party with over the years. I do different things with them now. Our relationships are so much more meaningful. I'll go for a run in the park with my best mate quite regularly. We'll have really good chats. He still drinks. Sometimes I'll go to the pub with him and I'll have a soft drink and he'll have a beer, and he doesn't mind and I don't mind. I just go home earlier, to be honest. And, I'll go for lunch with my mates. I'll go for dinner with my mates. I just see them in a different context. I see them at the game. We still go to the game. And then after the game, I might stop and have one Coca-Cola. And when they start getting drunk, I disappear on train home nice and early. And it just works. So I've been lucky.
Why do you think men need this book? Why do you think this book is needed? Because I think it absolutely is. I mean, even now, I still think there's a big lag in men being able to just say that they need help or they're struggling. Like, what you said you wrote it because it was the book that you wanted to read. But why do you think men need this? Do you think they're still struggling as badly?
Yeah, I think men are still really struggling. I think the change that I've observed in men in recent years, in my circle of mates, is that they're more open to the idea of the existence of mental health issues, right? And they're more open to the idea of people saying, oh, I've got an unhealthy relationship with alcohol, I need to stop, right? So the difference is 10 years ago, there would have been, in my social circle, there would have been very little truck with anyone even mentioning that. Someone would have said, I'm in therapy. They go, oh, do me a favour, you idiot. Stop being such a whinger. Right now, even the roughest blokes I will know will go, oh, it's really good, mate. Well done. I'm proud of you, or something like that. But that's different to them actually opening up and saying, yeah, I've got a problem and I want to confront it. So what they've done is they've learned to pay a bit of lip service, a lot of blokes, to sort of say, okay, I can tolerate and accept this, and I'm going to be encouraging because I know that's kind. But it's not for me. I mean, Veronica, you wouldn't believe the amount of blokes who said to me about this book. Yeah, I like your book, Sam. I mean, me personally, I've been quite lucky in life because I've never had mental health, right? And I go, and that's a phrase that people have been using a lot to me, right? No, I've never had mental health, so I've been lucky. But I think it's great that you've been so honest about yours, right? And you're like, no, you have had mental health, like you've had physical health. It's just the way it is, and so. What I'm trying to do is, because in the book, this book is not it's very honest, right? But it's not earnest. It's funny. People tell me it's funny. I tried to make it funny, and I've had a lot of good feedback. Because even when I write about the darkest times, I try to tell it in the context of amusing stories, right? And I write in my own vernacular. It's not fancy. It's down. I tried to make it very down to earth. There's swearing in it.
It's not a book. It's not a book written by an academic. I really struggle with.
It's not academic, and it's also not. It's not prissy, and I've got no problem with any of the books written by all these different types of writers. Fantastic, but I think the same messages need to be told in as many different languages as possible, and this is a language for what we call Jack the Lad, right, here in this country, and hopefully Americans listening to this will understand what I mean by that. The Maxim guys or whatever who don't want to take anything, least of all themselves, seriously. They can read this book and they can think, actually, and also it just encourages guys who haven't necessarily hit rock bottom, who haven't necessarily had the worst sort of traumas in life. They weren't victims of abuse, right, or violence, or they haven't suffered some huge grief or bankruptcy or divorce or any of the big things that you, as a bloke, you kind of feel, oh, I'm allowed to feel sad about that. You might just be getting overwhelmed by life, by the combined pressures of, let's say, fatherhood and career and money and maintaining your social life. These things can get on top of you. You are allowed to feel bad about those things, and you need to confront them. It doesn't mean you have to become a weirdo. It doesn't mean you have to start wearing not wearing shoes and socks, right? You just have to be reflective and crucially be kind to yourself a little bit,
Oh my gosh, that's so funny that you've had guys say that to you, that that is someone who is so disconnected from themselves.
Yeah.
And just lacking in complete self-awareness. It's really, and I think that was the messaging, right? Isn't it? It's like blokes like you don't have mental health struggles. So
and my point in the book is we all have this.
Yeah.
Even if you have like a life that superficially seems like the best life in the world, great. But you're still going to have good days and bad days. And if you try to pretend that you're not having those bad days, then the bad feelings will fester inside of you. And that's why a lot of guys are staying up drinking at night, and because they've still got a good job and they still drive a nice car, they think that there's no problem, right? Because they're not on a park bench drinking out of a brown paper bag.
Yeah.
But in fact, the amount of blokes I know, middle-aged guys who are successful, their marriage doesn't seem to be in immediate peril. They still drive their kids to Little League or whatever, but they are staying up drinking. They cannot relax or switch off without several drinks inside of them. That's indicative to me of some mental health issues that need addressing.
Yeah, or they can't talk about anything they feel without alcohol inside them.
Yeah.
Can I ask what has been most helpful to you? Because we were just chatting before we went live about we both have dogs and how just how good they are for mental health. I just think everyone should have a dog. They just make every day better. But what's really helped you?
Well, there are practical external things such as, therapy and writing and sharing a huge amount about this sort of stuff and exercise, which I'm sure is a very common one. But really, one of the main things that I write about in the book is how the small things in life, the joy that I needed, the sense of joy and fulfillment and peace and all the other good things in life were already around me, right? And what drink had done and overwork had done was distract me from those things and make me feel as if they weren't enough, but they always were. So I just needed to get out of that space. And now I just, the great pleasures for me are small things. Yes, I've got a dog now, which is just every day, no matter how exhausted or miserable I can be about a bill's just arrived that I wasn't expecting. And oh no, what am I going to do about this? And then I'll see the dog and we'll go for a walk or we'll just have a cuddle and it's amazing. So there's that. But it's all the little things. Like my son comes in from school. He's 11. He walks himself home from school at 3:30, and I work mostly from home. And I've got a little studio that I write in and podcast from in my back garden. And I set an alarm because at 3:35 he'll be home, and we have a routine where he comes in, he gets changed out of his uniform. I put the kettle on. We sit down and we have a cup of tea. Very British. We sit down. We have a cup of tea and a bit of toast together, and we just chat about the day. And I feel absolutely great. My daughter is 15. And so obviously when you've got a teenage daughter, the things that you have in common start to drift a little bit, right? Because, she's a teenage girl. But one thing that she's obsessed with, right, is Grey's Anatomy. Like, she's obsessed with this show. And about a year and a half ago, I found that we were doing less things together than we used to, right? Like, so for instance, she used to come to the soccer with me. She doesn't like doing that anymore. And I said, I might start watching this show with you. Do you fancy going back to the beginning? And she said, yeah. And so every night at 8, that 8 till 8:40 is a sacred time where everyone knows I am unavailable because I am in the bedroom, lying on the bed, and me and my daughter have got some snacks and a drink, and we are watching Grey's Anatomy together, and we're laughing about it and joking about it, and we've got that little thing in common with each other. And it's daft, it's just a TV show. But it's like, it's not about the TV show and whether you like that TV show or not. It's about sharing moments with people who you love and who make you laugh, and just, the little things in life that you kind of spent so many years working hard to build up around you. And then once you had them all, you didn't really make the most of them or pay attention to them because you were too busy off working or getting drunk or doing drugs. And so really the most important thing for me is to notice all the little joys that are around me every day.
I love that. You say that so well. It's like, my best friend always teases me. Like, one of the things I do to relax is jigsaw puzzles. Like, my family always tease me, like I get completely lost in it. And my friend says, your 20-year-old self is like literally vomiting at the side. And I'm like, And then sometimes my kids help, and then we get into it, and then a couple of hours have gone by, and it's like,
it's lovely.
It's like we were missing our lives. We thought we were living the life, but we were missing our lives, right?
100%. 100%, yeah. And when you say, if someone says to me, your 20-year-old self is vomiting right now, my response to that would be, good. That means I'm on the right track. Anything that would upset and offend my 20-year-old self means that I'm living my best life now, because my 20-year-old self was so cynical and wrapped up in judgmentalism and so dependent on outside validation. Do you know what I mean? Rather than internal validation, that I was just a mess. And it took me years to realize that. And now if I do something, oh my God, like, I'm going on a hiking weekend with my cousin next weekend.
I love hiking. In the South
Downs, and lovely. I would say this though, Veronica, it does help being middle-aged. And so, I'm 47, and I do sometimes think, because occasionally, since I've done the book especially, I get a lot of messages from guys on social media or by email asking advice. And when they're younger, I do sometimes think, I got sober at 40. I know you got sober a lot younger than that. And I was very ready in my life stage. I felt that part of me felt, well, I've been there, I've done that, I've tried all the things that you're supposed to try when you're young. But I also felt just, I suppose naturally you start to embrace, a calmer, more peaceful life. Peace is what I aspire to more than anything. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Just a peaceful life. Yeah. I think it probably is. It would have been harder for me younger to embrace those things. And I probably would have had less acceptance from my peers as well. So I am mindful of the fact that it's easy for me to sit here in my 40s and say these things.
Yeah, it's, I've been sober in my 20s, 30s, 40s, and I just turned 50. I mean, when you get sober at 27, like I did, I was 100% certain my life was over, like 100%. And then it's this reawakening where you just begin to realize that actually maybe it's not. And then I always say to my clients, I've done everything. I've done it all sober, and it was all better. Like I've been the gigs, the concerts, the festivals, the travel, all of it. it takes what it takes. I really, what I love about you and what you're doing is you're breaking that kind of delusion that we have, and particularly in the UK, so much about alcohol and the role it has in our culture, and kind of you're holding up a mirror to that. And I love the way that you do it. Sam, it's been brilliant having you on again. Where can people find you if they want to kind of... The book's on Amazon. It's fantastic. Sam's a great storyteller. It is funny. It's really relatable. I'm sure there's a man in your life right now who needs this book. But where can people find you? You do have podcasts and all sorts of things, don't you?
Yeah. I have this book actually grew out of my Substack. Substack, the newsletter sort of site that, and I have a publication on there called The Reset. So that's a newsletter and a regular podcast where I interview people, mainly guys, about. Although you're one of the few female guests who have been on it, which is a great honour.
Oh, I feel honoured
for us both. Right, and but yeah, you can find that at samdelaney.substack.com. And all of my other stuff that I do is probably the best place to start is my website, which is samdelaney.co.uk.
Great. And you're on Instagram and Twitter and all of that kind of stuff.
On Twitter, I'm Delaney Man.
Put all the links in the show notes.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you again, Sam. It was great. I think the book's fantastic. I think that there's a lot of American guys out there who would be fabulously entertained and will learn something from reading it. So thank you so much for coming on.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.